Good evening, everybody. Hope everybody's doing good. Here is Rogelio Carrillo, and we want to start with a prayer, just to ask God, our Creator, so we have the right words on this talk. Vamos a empezar.
Sí, buenas tardes a todos.
How are you, everybody?
Primero, permiso al espíritu de Holanda
I want to ask permission to the spirits here in Holland,
para poder platicar con
so
ustedes.
we can talk and I can talk to everybody here.
Pedir permiso a ese espíritu para poder platicar.
And ask permission to the spirits so we can have the right words.
Red Hamam. Mascaway Maril Mal and Yamanam. Seratota Termati Ulikian, Terrorati Alen. Renial Kapati Manan, Mascaway Maril. Very well, Mema added to Toyata, Red Hamam.
So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Rogelio. Welcome. Thank you for coming. We'd like to introduce you to our panel, which will begin with some short presentations before we enjoy a collective discussion, including your questions. I'm Yogi Hendland, the moderator, and I arrive at these questions through commitments to ecodelics, biostimatics, and indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. So first, we'll have a short message from Rich Doyle, who was originally supposed to be part of this panel but couldn't make it because of family commitments. I'll say something briefly. Then we have Professor Christine Hauskeller, Paloma David Velázquez, and representatives from the Villarrica Preservation Project, Don Rogelio Carrillo and Santiago Alonso, before we have a panel discussion and audience questions. And if there's some magic in psychedelic substances, surely it is a magic that must be sustained and catered to, cultivated rather than taken for granted, or worse, mined, extracted, and drawn down until it is a tepid high, like what we've done with cigarettes and vapes, with sacred tobacco. Here's some words from Rich Doyle.
Good afternoon, good morning, whatever time it is in Amsterdam. Thank you to Yogi for letting me contribute despite my need to be here in North America due to family considerations. I only want to take 3 minutes or so, but my name is Richard Doyle. I'm a professor at Penn State. I've been exploring and researching and writing about the scholarship and science of psychedelics since the late 20th century. And which I know still makes me a newbie compared to the week or so ponds together. And what I wanted to talk to you today under the influence of Yogi was just some quick points about decolonization and psychedelics, just to help set the table a little bit for the much more important conversation I know that's going to happen live. The first is just to point people to an essay that I enjoyed writing, was lucky enough to write with Michelle Denimo and Trey Connor here in the United States. It's called Dark Side of the Shroom. And if you Google Dark Side of the Shroom, you'll see that it's an essay in anthropology of consciousness that argues about a very particular kind of logic that corporate-backed psychedelic science has used in order to shift psychedelics into the domain of proprietary knowledge. And you could say that the fundamental move there is to begin the, quote, re-legitimization of psychedelics, or the, quote-unquote, psychedelic renaissance, unquote, which never happened. The psychedelic research never stopped. To legitimate it first through mystical/sacred type experience, and then to quickly quickly shift to medicalize. So first we discover that they are sacred, and then we declare that they must be medicalized. Obviously, in that paper, Dr. Sally Schroen, the emphasis is on psilocybin and the ways in which psilocybin has been desacralized by the process of legitimation. And obviously, what's going on with the FDA attempted or possible rescheduling of mescaline, reportedly at a cost of $250 million, is again a maneuver that allows us to desacralize and medicalize, again, as with psilocybin, in the name of, quote, standardization and safety, which I think is fair to say reveals a misrecognition of what, quote, psychedelics are. So that's all the time I really have. Check out Dark Side of the Moon, Dark Side of the Shroom, Dark Side of the Moon's good too. And the mantra I have for today is no desacralization without compensation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. So, Richard Doyle's the author of Darwin's Pharmacy, of course. And this sort of sets the tone for this question of discordant timelines. The capitalist DoorDash psychedelics does not meet the natural growth rates of organisms like Bufo, Iboga, Peyote, which are being poached and cartelized into endangerment. And as Rich says, the revolution will not be medicalized. You know, existence is not a condition that needs medical treatment, but it's something that we all have to deal with, and we don't need to over-psychologize or pathologize our everyday lived experience. Rich shows that the FDA proposed rescheduling of mescaline, will cost about $250 million, which happens to be about the exact amount that the Visharika need to protect their territory against mining of Wirikuta, the birthplace of Peyote. We could talk about areas of colonization. Christine will talk about that in her presentation. But we can see they are manifold. We can talk about substance degeneration, substance essentialism, decontextualization, and capitalist realism. And I'm going to argue that this is not just bad for the traditional indigenous communities from which these medicines come from, but it's bad for everyone. Like Frantz Fanon talks about, colonization hurts colonizers and the colonized. And that treating these substances as substantia nullius sort of perpetuates a long-standing notion that it's just a molecule, that it's just empty, and that we can do anything we want with it without remainder. And so I'm going to posit this hypothesis that these beings, these medicines, will somatically rebel to co-optation. When they get monetized and reduced, their healing powers will wane. We won't actually get their full potential when we do this. And for a long time, we've made psychedelics try to do the work of changing society that we need to do. We've talked about the substance while putting much less emphasis on setting, let alone matrix, which is the sort of totalizing world that we live in that allows these to arise in the first place. So are we looking at black markets? Are we looking at illegal economies and the impacts that new sort of bonanzas or demand for these substances will bring? As we can see in Mexico, peyote is now being poached in its native places because it can take a minimum of 5 years, 30, 50 years for a bud to grow to maturity. And psychedelics aren't unique, but they should be different. We see that questions of biopiracy have been for many, many centuries going on. And yet, we would like to think that because we do believe in these substances as something different, that we can do something different. So part of this is the hard work that we take psychedelics to help us with in the first place, which is decolonizing our egos. for participants, facilitators, people whose identities hinge on psychedelics, companies looking to make a profit, to commercialize psychedelics, and anyone else bootstrapping their recognition, reputation, wealth, or sex appeal on psychedelics. And finally, I'm going to argue that it's not just nice to have ethics, to take these things into account, but according to Karen Barad, that these are onto-ethical epistemologies. These are Gordian knots that you pull at one and the other two change in real time. And that we will not achieve what we wish to if we go about it incorrectly. And don't get me wrong, I'm not an essentialist here. There are plural good ways, syncretist ways that we can go about it. But we must also acknowledge concomitantly there are many bad plural ways of relating, right, with our relations of these ecodelic substances. And finally, I just want to finish with a slide from when I posted that we were going to have this panel. Nora Bateson of Morum Data Labs and of the International Bates Institute responded that what we need is not to psychologize our problems, not to individualize, responsibilize, medicalize, pharmaceuticalize them, but instead understand that sympathy is what's going on. It's learning together, that we, psychedelics will only reflect us according to the depths that we afford. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lily. Thank you all for being here. I will talk a little bit on decolonial ethics, and I will start this with, hopefully not very boring and very brief. However, I think it's important to conceptualize this, that when we talk about decolonization, we need to think about the beginnings of colonization. So psychedelics and the Renaissance that may never have happened is sort of something that goes back from what we in the West know at least 500-600 years, because with the missionaries and the conquistadors, it became obvious that these indigenous peoples and the Americans were doing strange things. They were using substances such as peyote and ayahuasca and mushrooms and iboga and cannabis, and they seemed to get into states of mind that were somewhat scary. Now, the first thing you need to do is, when you want to control a place, is to actually control the substances that people care about and that they make your communities, that make their communities tick. So it became very important to sort of tackle the problem of this experience. But there's more to this, and that has to do with Western modernity. We need to somehow seem to control these substances. But on the other hand, we have these bourgeois psychonauts that in the 1800s started to think, in the 1900s started to think about, try substances, experiment with mescaline, write about opium, There's a very small, elite, privileged group of men who were sort of doing their psychonautic explorations, which, however, I think is still a very valid way of using psychedelics. Then in the 1900s, from 1900 onward, in the 20th century, we see the development of syncretic religions, such as the Santo Daime or the União de Vegetal, that actually bring together some multi-traditional practices from Black people, indigenous peoples, but also the Catholic religions that have now become so dominant in the countries, in Brazil in particular, where these religions developed. And then finally we get to the 1950s and the rediscovery of something that was not actually being discovered of the weird, when we have this whole story, the contested story of Gordon Wasson and Maria Sabina around psilocybin mushrooms, and then of course the new drugs, the Western drugs, the stuff that we do. It comes out of laboratories, it can be mass produced, it is extremely cheap to make, and it seems to create similar kinds of experiences. That led to the 1960s and onwards a whole culture in which millions of people have psychedelic experiences in very different contexts. In festivals, clubs, and raves, where they are part of the way we live. Yeah? This is to call this all so. Yes, there was the war on drugs with certain UN and other laws and persecution and the policing. This is all very real. And where I live in Devon, if you're white and nice, you can grow your mushrooms and nobody will ever police you. That doesn't mean that when you're black and in London, the same is true for you. And not everybody has a big garden, etc. We have a massive class distribution and race distribution in terms of the ways in which legality and illegality are maneuvered through in Northern America and in the whole of Europe. So on the one hand, we have these large subcultures that are, I would say, not illegal. They are actually semi-legal. Raves happen with the police knowing, and so do festivals. There is a whole health service provided for users. There is a way in which the legality is really, as we know, an instrument to police particular groups of people, not the substances, and that is important. We have a very pick and choose attitude to who is and who isn't allowed to use psychedelics. But there's also the struggle about the power of the weird and the way in which the imperialist enlightened West normalized a very narrow state of consciousness as normal. Dreams are something you may have at night and you ideally forget them as soon as you wake up. You should definitely not be troubled by them in the afternoon. And then there are other ways in which we have religion or spaces in which you can do weird things, but that is very clearly your private sphere. It should not affect your work life, the way you make decisions about whether you have an organ transplant or whether you give blood transfusion. And then there is mental illness, that is the last sort of allowed category of being weird, but of course that is very contested. Mental illness and psychosis are then the people who need treatment to be made fit back in if we don't put them into asylums and lock them out. So psychedelic practices being common in the Americas had to be controlled, of course, by the conquistadors and the missionaries, because this is how you gain power. You have to install your system of beliefs and your system of normality into a society, which means, and Cires González Romero has just been studying this in the archives of the Inquisition and found really interesting cases of the ways in which women were persecuted and killed for using purity in particular. What he found looking at these legal documents is really quite interesting. So this is a power strategy in relation to the weird. And now we see this coming back with another power strategy, the institutions of the medicine and the pharmaceutical industry that bring a recolonization of the space that psychedelic substances in Europe and in the West have become to occupy through a very controlled appropriation and system of oversight that goes through regulatory institutions. So these are the uses of psychedelics most of us are familiar with. And now we have this, psychedelic medicine, and the important picture here, of course, is the one on the right-hand side bottom, where you see the difference. Just to go back to this, do you see the fun? Do you see the light? Let's go back to this and see where the problem lies. I cannot expand on this very much in this talk. I want to come back to the decolonization topic, but it is very important, and I will get back to it in a minute. But first, I have learned something in the last 2 years since publishing this paper with colleagues on decolonization as a metaphor. I still think we had some important points and pointing out some good examples of how the decolonization happens in the psychedelic space. So we were looking at this Takin Young paper that says that decolonization is not a metaphor, and we were making the opposite point here, saying that actually metaphorically using this concept allows us to identify techniques of colonization that are now underway. And we argued that if we actually say decolonization has to be taken literal, then we are reinstalling a dualist distinction between the metaphor and the literal, which gets us back into the whole colonial way of thinking, which always operates with dualisms. So we need more open ways of thinking, rather than using these epistemic tropes from the playbook of colonization. And of course, in a way in which they usually privilege North American history and situations when people talk decolonization. Coming from the UK, decolonization looking at Asia could look very differently from some of this debate that is so prominent. So we argued and showed some examples of how medicalization of psychedelics entails active new colonizations and that we need a new ethics and disruptive interventions against these practices. But I've also, and the methods of colonization that are being used affect, I've just listed them here. It's really the traditional methods of colonization in the psychedelic space: extraction, oppression, appropriation, synthetic reproduction, marketization, and the control of profits. And the objects that are being colonized are plants and animals, indigenous knowledges, indigenous people, marginalized people. And that with that I mean this huge subculture underground that I've mentioned before. Minds and experiences, hopes and needs. The clinical takeover has a way to make patients into passive exemplars because it measures and instrumentalizes what I think and what it recognizes as being incommensurable, as experiences that they cannot easily be measured because it is the space of the will. But also the setting of eye shades and hexagons in a closed room with two people holding their hand if you need it, is one in which actually communal experiences and nature experiences are foreclosed. It's the nature you can experience in this setting is the one you already have in your head. It doesn't challenge you, it doesn't actually lead you to something that is physically felt, touched, a new vision. It's the stuff that you've already somehow lodged in there. Minds are colonized through questionnaires and integration techniques. I will say more about that on Saturday, but there is a way in which the questionnaires structuring the interpretation of the experience according to what was the diagnostic purpose with which you started is a way in which I think we do colonize minds in this setting. We see substance fetishism, as I would call this, the ways in which it is not the patient or the therapist that actually makes the change, but the critical agent, problematic, unfathomable agent is the substance or the experience. But it usually is the substance. And we commodify through scientification by delegitimizing indigenous and subcultural uses and attempts to remove agency in the experiences in this sort of setting. So the value lies, and that is a very old trope of critique, not that old maybe, but it's the anti-psychiatrist critique from the 1960s and 70s. I have something to say on zero trauma, but I don't do it now. We have some ethical challenges in this clinical container, and the most important ones of them are that experiences of awe and beauty and care, but also the confrontation with trauma and angst that psychedelic experiences elicit in people are actually very closely monitored, managed, and directed. But also that respect for nature and its power is somewhat marginalized and ruled out. So there is not the kind of respect for the substance that you might have in other settings, because it is in this medicalized space, and we look at psychedelics as drugs. So we need a pro-nature, de-alienating and decolonizing ethics in the space. One thing I've learned, as I said earlier, is that in this paper and in my thinking for a while, I thought, yeah, but you can't just give back the land. What would happen with the land if we just give it back? I mean, nobody wants it. It's all cocoa plant and sugar and coffee, and the forests have been destroyed. And I have an indigenous Mayan student, Arnulfo Oklash, who I said this to at some point, and then Arnulfo just said, just give us back the land. And I realized it was very white mind micromanaging. Okay? I was making quite sound arguments, sounded very sound to me, until he said that. And then I thought about the history I know, that actually after most of the indigenous peoples in the Americas died out from banal infections that the colonizers brought, the forest grew back within 100 years. It was looking very pristine to Humboldt and his friends. So there is, and we are only now discovering the remnants of these civilizations with new aerial pictures. There is a way in which I, and many of us maybe, need to think and have more trust that actually there are people who can look after nature in a way we can't, and we don't think of doing. This way in which it takes time, but not too much time, to actually turn the land that has been destroyed into very fertile forests that people can live in and with in a different way. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paloma David, and today I'm going to be talking about something that I call ontological pluralism and the needs that we have to embed it in psychedelic research. So, during my research, I have witnessed the shifting perceptions of ayahuasca as an object of study in the West, from plant specimen in the 1800s to a mixture of active alkaloids in the 1900s, to the more contemporary concept of psychedelic and therapeutic agent. And in these shifting historical perceptions, the Amazonian brew has been subjected to a myriad of conceptual frameworks that is meant to try to understand what it is and what it does. And while we in the West are starting to catch up, ayahuasca has been a part of Amazonian medicinal, ritual, and cultural practices for centuries before the first botanists arrived. So, in interest of epistemic humility, don't you think that the first explorers who encountered the brew in the 1800s and who concluded the brew-induced visions of falsity still lacked some conceptual tools to understand the phenomena that they were encountering? After decades of research, we now have different conceptual tools to understand the potential of ayahuasca, and we can see in hindsight that the Victorian botanists were missing on something exceptional, possibly due to an epistemic overconfidence and a kind of ontological myopia. This combination of both confidence and myopia seemed to have made them dismiss rather quickly the ontological and epistemological configurations that emerged in indigenous worlds. Instead, they placed an ontological regime in which ayahuasca was an object and indigenous practices were beliefs. But this ontological regime failed to give us a complete picture about how these indigenous worlds conceptualize the nature of being, the relationship between humans and the world, and the relationship between humans and non-humans. So in other words, their ontologies. Wouldn't you agree that the 19th century botanists didn't have the complete picture to understand the phenomena that they were encountering? And that a century of intellectual development was still needed for the intellectual history of the West to understand the kinds of experiences that the ayahuasca brew elicits? I want to argue that on top of epistemic humility in our conversations with indigenous communities, we could benefit as well from ontological humility, from understanding that there are different ways of conceptualizing the relationship between humans and non-humans, and suspending, even if provisionally, some of the binaries and hierarchies that are entrenched in our knowledge-making practices and that operate from the dichotomies between nature and culture, mind and body, subjects and objects. I argue that the dialogue between indigenous communities and the West has taken place in a kind of ontological context zone, an encounter where multiple ontologies coexist, grapple, and negotiate with each other in the context of asymmetrical power relations. And the difference between relating with ayahuasca as an object of study that one can extract alkaloids from, and relating with it as a plant teacher or as a subject with agency and knowledge is onto-epistemological in nature. It entwines our situated practices of knowledge and being. And by conceptualizing these onto-epistemic differences, I want to argue that they are both expressions of situated knowledge-making, which are attempting to communicate with each other and possibly translate their terms to each other. In my perspective, the dialogue with indigenous communities is still within an ontological context zone of different ways of understanding reality, the place of the humans in the world, and the agency of non-humans. If I can leave you today with one idea, I want it to be the concept of ontological pluralism. The conventional notion of cultural belief is no longer sufficient to describe the interactions between Western knowledge-making practices and indigenous onto epistemologies. During this conference, when we engage with difference, particularly with indigenous difference, let us suspend for a moment our own ontological assumptions and wonder, how are our indigenous interlocutors conceptualizing their relationship with plant medicine? How are they conceptualizing the terms by which they acquire knowledge? How do they understand agency, animacy, and personhood? And how are their knowledge-making practices creating the boundaries of their world? It is not about absorbing these worlds through translation, or far worse, appropriation, but rather it's about opening our conceptual space for these other worlds to coexist with ours and to engage in respectful and egalitarian dialogues. Imagine the epistemological space that had to be opened between the 19th century botanist and the 21st century psychedelic therapist. Imagine that there might be a similar ontological abyss between our worlds that might not be visible, but nevertheless be present. I urge you, as scientists, explorers, enthusiasts, and members of academia, to engage with our indigenous counterparts through the lens of ontological humility and curiosity. This means recognizing that our own ontological commitments are just blueprints to navigate the world, and that there are other very rich tapestries that conceptualize our binaries and hierarchies between mind and body, nature and culture, and subjects and objects as relationalities, entanglements, or continuums. That there are other knowledge-making practices that in turn become world-making practices. And finally, that there are other worlds that exist within our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Paloma. Te toca a ti. Toma lo que necesita. Levanta. 2 días. Take 2 days. Explain what you want.
Bueno, mi nombre es Takame, que significa colibrí,
My name is Otakame, that means hummingbird,
de la tradición wixárika
from the Wixárika tradition,
del pueblo de México.
from the people of Mexico.
Actualmente, ahorita soy contador de historia.
Right now I'm the storyteller for my people.
En el pueblo nos dan cargos por 5 años, diferentes cargos. Ahora me tocó para contar historia.
In my village, they give you responsibilities. Every 5 years, you have to do a responsibility for 5 years. And now I'm the storyteller for 5 years.
Entonces tengo derecho de contar historia.
So I have the right to tell stories.
Además es mi trabajo.
And it's my job too.
Entonces la historia de nosotros es que nosotros vivíamos antes en las cuevas, en las grutas.
So the story of my people is that all of us, we used to live in the caves, deep down in the mountains.
Y nuestra comida era la cacería de venado, jabalí, algunas frutas, pero más cacería.
And our food was hunting deer and wild boar and collecting some vegetables and some different seeds, but mostly was from hunting.
Cuando se acababa la comida, nos buscábamos otra cueva.
When the food used to be finished there, we used to move to another cave.
Y así pasamos muchas cuevas.
And like that, we visit many caves.
En una de las cuevas, el mayor de nosotros soñó un venado azul.
In one of those caves, our elder dreamed of a blue deer.
Pues en la mañana mandó a los mejores cazadores, porque todos querían ir, pero mejor mandó a los mejores.
So in the morning, he made council and brought all the hunters, and he chose the best ones because everybody wanted to go.
Y también que llevaran sus mejores arcos, sus mejores flechas, porque nosotros tenemos flechas de abuelo, de tatarabuelo, flechas muy antiguas.
and to bring their best bows and their best arrows, because in my tribe they have different kinds of arrows, from kids all the way to elders.
Y cuando encontraron en la montaña muchos venados, pero entre este grupo había uno azul, diferente a los demás.
And when they were in the mountain, the hunters, when they saw the deer, they saw one of them that was a blue deer.
Entonces, el más bueno del grupo le disparó y le pegó la flecha en la costilla.
So the best hunter threw his arrow and hit the ribcage of that deer.
Este venado se fue corriendo con la flecha clavada, dirección al este.
This deer went running with the arrow stuck in his ribcage, all running to the east direction.
Y los cazadores se fueron atrás y veían que ya estaba a punto de morir, pero seguían caminando.
And the hunters were tracking him, following him behind, and they could see on him that he was almost about to die, but he was still going.
Y hasta que llegaron a un lugar muy bonito que ahora le llamamos Virikuta.
Until they arrived to a really beautiful place that my people call Virikuta.
Es una cosa muy extraña. Ahí encontraron la flecha, pero ya no encontraron al venado.
When they arrived there, they only found the arrow, but they didn't find the deer.
Entonces encontraron esto.
They found this,
Y la flecha que estaba clavada aquí.
and the arrow was in the middle of the medicine.
Y cuando le preguntaron al dueño de la flecha, ¿es su flecha? Sí, es mi flecha.
When they asked the hunter that threw the arrow, "Is this your arrow?" He said, "Yeah, that's my arrow."
¿Pero qué pasó? ¿Qué pasó?
What happened? What's going on?
Entonces, uno de ellos dijo, el abuelo en las noches platica de que los animales se pueden transformar en planta, o el humano se puede transformar en animal o planta, y es lo que acaba de suceder.
Grandpa back home always talks about how can animals change into plants or humans change into animals. I think this is just what happened.
El abuelo siempre cuenta esta historia y decimos que está loco.
We always say
Eso
that
acaba
grandpa
de
is crazy.
suceder.
Look what just happened now.
Entonces, lo que hicieron los cazadores, cortaron esta planta, así como esto, con la flecha clavada, y cortaron más cactus, lo que llamamos hickory. Cortaron más hickory y se regresaron al pueblo.
So what the hunters did is they cut the plant with the arrow, and they cut all the different medicines. Hickory is what they call peyote that were around, and they went back home.
Y comieron por primera vez esta planta en la cueva. Nosotros tenemos esta cueva sagrada ahora.
And they ate this plant for the first time back in the cave.
Y esta planta nos ha enseñado muchas cosas.
Back home we have this herb, this plant, and it has shown us many things.
Esta planta nos ha curado enfermedades, nos ha enseñado a cantar, nos ha enseñado a curar personas que están muy malas.
This plant has teach us how to cure illnesses, to sing, to heal the ill, to doctor.
Y pues este camino, este recorrido que yo cuento, son 17 días caminando para llegar a encontrar esta planta.
And this story that I'm telling, if you walk from that cave to where the medicine is 17 days by foot, walking.
Entonces estos 17 días cada noche se ponía fuego.
And in these 17 days, every night that we stopped, we used to light the fire as a tribe.
Entonces en estos 17 días para ir, no sal, no azúcar, no sexo.
In these 17 days, we couldn't have no sugar, no salt, no sex,
Para encontrar esta planta.
just to find it.
Y después de encontrar esta planta, regresar otros 17 días.
And once we found this plant, go back 17 days carrying it.
Hace muy pocos días, los españoles llevaron caballo.
Then, when a few days ago, the Spanish came and brought horses with them.
Hace 4 días, muy poquito.
Just 4 days ago.
Yo estoy hablando más de 500 años.
I'm talking, no, 500 years.
Después fuimos a caballo a buscar esto.
Then when the horse arrived to my people, we started going by horse.
Hace muy poquito, ahora ya llevan un carro los españoles.
Now the Spanish brought cars.
Ahora ya hemos ido en carro.
Now we go in
Claro,
cars.
sí, fue muy poquito, ayer al día, no fue mucho.
That was yesterday, some days ago.
Pero tenemos la fe de encontrar.
But we have faith in finding medicine.
Queremos seguir con los conocimientos antiguos.
We want to keep preserving our old knowledge.
Nosotros vivíamos en las cuevas, no sabíamos nada.
We used to live in the caves, we didn't know anything.
No sabíamos hablar con la lluvia, no sabíamos hablar con la tierra.
We didn't know how to talk to the rain, we didn't know how to talk to Mother Earth.
No sabíamos hacer llover.
We didn't know how to make rain.
Ahora, para sembrar, necesitamos hacer llover primero, pedir lluvia. Para
So-
sembrar julio, agosto, septiembre.
So we can plant on the beginning of July. We need to learn how to pray so the rain comes.
No hacer llover para jugar, es para sembrar.
It's not,
Cultivo.
it's not to play around in the rain, it's to plant our food and how we sustain ourselves.
Yo soy contador de historia en mi pueblo, yo les cuento a los jóvenes. No me quieren creer esto.
I'm a storyteller and back home the youth don't want to listen to me.
Unos jóvenes que sí me creen, ok, vamos a caminar por lo menos 3 días, 4 días, a ver cómo se siente.
The ones that do believe me, they say, okay, uncle, let's go walk for 3,
No se
4 days.
animan los jóvenes a caminar ahora ya.
Now the youth are lazy, they don't want to walk.
Yo he caminado 4 días, yo conozco 4 o 5 días, pero mis abuelos caminaron 17 días.
I used to walk to gather medicine for 5, 4 days, but my grandpa used to go for 17 days.
Entonces, este respeto ya se ha perdido. Hay que tener mucho respeto con esta planta.
So this respect to the plant has been lost. We need to have respect, a lot of respect to this plant.
Si yo respeto esta planta, me va a enseñar.
If I respect this plant, it's going to show me, teach me.
Ahora lo que hemos visto que llegan al desierto sin respeto y sin permiso, lo cortan, se lo comen, no les enseña nada.
Now we've been seeing people arriving in the desert just as tourists, and they go, cut it, and they eat it without respect. Doesn't show them anything, just gets them sick.
No hicieron la dieta, no caminaron, no hay respeto.
They didn't do the diet, they didn't know the sites, they didn't do the walk, so there's no respect.
Y también hemos visto que la persona se emociona y encuentras, corta 10, 15 y solo se come 1 o 2.
And we see them that they get all excited that they found medicine and start cutting 10, 20, but they can only eat 2.
Porque si no tienes respeto, te da malos visiones, te da malos sentimientos, te daña el cuerpo.
Because if you don't have respect, it's going to give you bad visions, bad feelings, and it's going to hurt your body
Entonces, porque no tienes preparación antes.
because you don't have the right preparation.
Entonces ahora la preocupación es la gente que cortó, lo tiró, la gente que ya no hay en algunas partes.
So the thing that worries me now is that there's a lot of people that have been over harvesting, and in some parts you cannot find it too.
Y esta planta para llegar a este tamaño se ocupa 30 años.
And this plant to get to this size is 30 years old.
Y yo hace 3 días yo lo corté en 2 segundos.
And 3 days ago I cut it in 3 seconds.
Un árbol crece 15, 20 años, yo lo corto en 2 minutos.
And a big tree that is 20 years old, it takes me like 2 or 3 minutes to cut it.
Entonces como que no hay respeto, lo voy a cortar porque lo voy a usar. Pero hay personas que cortan árbol solo por cortar.
So there's no respect. I cut this herb because I'm gonna use it. But there's people that just cut it just for cutting it.
O ya cortan esto, ya están pensando vender.
Or they cut it and they're thinking about selling it too.
Entonces entran al desierto, cortan y de repente quieren vender.
They go harvest the medicine and now they see how they're gonna sell it.
Sí, la medicina es para todo, pero todo con respeto.
The medicine is for everybody, but it has to be with respect.
Y a veces me han dicho, estoy muy malo, tengo cáncer, úlcera, piedras en los riñones. Venga al desierto.
When sometimes people tell me I have cancer, I have ulcers, kidney stones, different illnesses. He tells them, come to the desert.
Y empiezo a achacar, es por tomar mucho Coca-Cola, muchos chocolates. Por eso le pegó cáncer.
It's for drinking a lot of soda, a lot of chocolate, sugars. He starts checking them with the medicine.
Sí, y muchas cosas con químicos. Entonces, por eso ya le afectó aquí, por eso está enfermo.
Ingesting a lot of chemicals, that's why your body gets ill.
Entonces puede venir al desierto, dejar de comer sal 15 días, a que ya no caminemos, pero 15 días ahí sin comer sal, azúcar, y comer poco a poco, lo va a curar.
So you can come to the desert, like, clean yourself, start by eating good there, and even if we don't walk there anymore, then you can slowly eat the medicine by just cleaning your diet. So
Primero limpiarse para recibir esto.
first, you have to clean yourself to receive.
Si ahorita se los doy a alguien, pero si comió chocolate, capuchino o algo, lo va a hacer vomitar.
If I give it to somebody here, had chocolate, cappuccino, or something, it's gonna start purging.
Ese respeto hemos perdido nosotros mismos, mi tribu.
That's it, the respect that even my people has lost.
Entonces mi trabajo es ese, contar historia y que los jóvenes de mi pueblo respeten esta planta.
So that's my job, to be a storyteller, so that youth can respect this plant. So, hello.
Can you stand up, just, I can't see us that.
Okay. So, the year of 2020, Rogelio called me because the land where the peyote is growing, it was sold to 21 Canadian mining concessions. The biggest one is First Majestic Silver, it's in British Columbia, Canada. And this happened in 2012. We went to protest with the federal government. You can look it up in YouTube. We had videos, fireworks, all of that stuff. We managed to get the mines suspended, but at the same time they suspended the mines on 2015. They suspended them. On 2018, they privatized the land. No, so tomato corporations and different agro-industrial companies started coming in the area, just bulldozing where all the peyote is. And he called me and he says, hey, there's 500 acres of land that they're gonna destroy. And we decided to start a non-profit in United States, and we started to save peyote land right away. So that year we gathered like $300,000, and we put down the first payment for 500 acres of land, and we managed to save them from the tomato companies to turning them off. So after that, we now started a management plan together with the University of Mexico to start planting peyote too, no? Because if we don't plant the medicine, like he said, it takes 30 years to grow. We need to, if we want the kids of their culture to eat it, we need to start planting. So this year we managed to harvest like 10,000 seeds from scratch, and we're starting a program also to continue buying and purchasing more land and planting more seeds, regenerating the area and giving back the titles of their land to the tribes. Why do I say this? This is important because I think that's where decolonization starts, no? First, like they say, okay, just give back the land, but how we are gonna steward the land too, no? And also, I wanna say it because they are the first ones in line. Imagine there was a line when humans in the whole planet said, you guys cannot take any more plants. The first ones in that line to start protesting and protecting it are the indigenous people, the First Nations. That's the ones that stood with it. I know even here in Europe, you used to have your traditions, but I know you guys are in line too, but because the elders didn't manage to survive in the caves or whatever, they went through a lot of struggles. So the first ones in line that need documentation to carry any type of substance or anything in the world are them. They're still, when I was in university, I took out like 4 people of his tribe from jail. And even they can carry the medicine in a federal level in Mexico, but the police are not updated with the law, so they don't care and they put them in jail. So there's still a lot of injustices going on, no? And these are things to reflect, no? Who the first ones in, I don't believe that the medical community sometimes think of like they're cutting the line here. And now they want to start regulating and synthesizing. And they're not even thinking where it grows or who were the people that were first struggling so they could keep on their old ways of life, no? Because this is not an experience. I hear this word a lot here, and I'm gonna have an experience. No, this is a way of life. This is culture. This is how I walk my life with this medicine, and that's how I want to walk it. For me, I'm not taking an experience. I don't come to life to experience. I come to live and do something good. So from there, there's many subjects that are coming. I thought it was only like the first, like how you say, the first threat to peyote was the mining companies or the corrupt governments. But now we have a whole other enemy that just popped off, or is being a monster that is being in a cage that nobody's talking about here, like drug cartels. I don't know if any of you have been stopped by a drug cartel. I get stopped by drug cartels at least once a month. And they check my phone, they grab me, and they tie me up, and I have done that many times in my life. For me, it's normal. As it's normal, it's not, oh. So, where does the substances end? No? We create substances, and how they say they're gonna control it, regulate it. The truth is they cannot regulate nothing. That's it. So better to protect the people that have been already with the medicine and have them give them all the right tools from dignity on their doctoring practices and everything, and also protect the land where it grows, and helping with these projects, no? Because I was telling to everybody today, like the road to hell is made with good intentions.
Yes.
100%. Like all the substances that pharmaceutical companies created now are in the black market. Look at fentanyl. Started to help cancer patients. Look where it is now. You think the drug cartel is going to wait to synthesize mescaline out of I don't know what? No, they're going to go where the peyote is. They're going to cut it all out, and they're gonna synthesize it their way. That's already happening now. So that's what things that I wanna make people in first world countries think. Think of us in the third world countries, what we're going to. We live a war on drugs, like firsthand. No, the war on drugs kills more people than any of your psychedelic clinic kills.
Yes.
By far. So things to think about, no? Who are we supporting? How are we supporting? How are we protecting really the land, the environment, the water we're drinking, the culture, the elders? Because that's what we do as an organization, and I really want to thank you here in front of everybody. Like nobody supported us to bring Rogelio here. Like it comes out, even I've been to other psychedelic conferences, and they bring Paul Stedman, and they pay his ticket, and he's a great speaker. But I want to thank you, bro, in front of everybody here for doing that for them, giving them a voice. No, I think he deserves an applause. Thank you, everybody, for listening to our words and was listening to Rogelio and his story. And if anyone wants to support, we can share about the non-profit and the projects we have. Just like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Camparios.
Camparios. The Tobira Kuta Preservation Project is the name of their NGO. So we have 5 minutes left. We'd love to hear your questions. Let's take a few, maybe quickly in the interest of time, and then we will respond quickly. quickly. And let's stay standing so they can see us back in the Sorry. So, hands, yes. Any questions? Yeah,
Should I ask in Spanish first?
just,
However you want.
Entonces voy a preguntarle en español. Si en
¿Puedes
su
traducir?
Just,
Si en su región también hay una criminalización de los defensores de la tierra, como se hace como en Chiapas, en el sureste, hay mucha criminalización y proyectos del gobierno
sí.
con capital europeo, y si eso también se pasa en su región.
Sí, es lo que acaba de decir, las compañías tomateras, compañía avícola, y que ponen los
Sí.
aerolitos, ¿cómo se llama?
Sí,
global and agricultural, agrochemical business are impacting both peyote and other cultures in Chiapas, like the Zapatistas.
Y también criminalización de los defensores de la tierra.
No teníamos este problema. Año pasado, en México hay un grupo que se llaman cárteles. Se están peleando en este área ahora. Antes se peleaban por Chiapas, por la frontera Guatemala. Ahora, como la montaña y el desierto, ahí está muy fuerte esta cosa. Sí.
Other questions?
Español.
pues en inglés para que te...
Okay, what
Pero
do you
esta
think?
traducción.
What do you think is a good solution for the cartels or the narcos attack? Like, has something worked out already, or what we could do to support that?
Pues I don't think it's hard. We just need to move the chessboard really good with regulations, with uniting all the tribes together, making a proclamation of peace for peyote, standing all together and not alone. Because if you're alone, that's when that's it.
So there's international, we
Yeah.
talked about this yesterday a little bit, international organizations like the UN and other psychedelic associations coming together to build a global framework to protect indigenous lands. Part of the problem is property, of course, and privatization, but another is, we talked about like frontline workers during COVID. Well, these are the frontline workers of psychedelics. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could just, on a research level or like practitioner level, if you could just make one small step towards colonizing your research, what would that look like? Because the whole institution that we are a part of is colonized. So how do you work within that, or can you work within that and support this?
Thank you for that question. Maybe we each take 20 seconds.
It's really a question of giving voice. Whose voices do we hear in this space? And the psychedelic space is very much dominated by not the voices of the frontline workers in psychedelics.
Thank you. I think academia is a very interesting place to start decolonizing all of this. I think we can couple our ethical commitments with our research endeavors. I think we can voice and help give voice to the people, to the indigenous people who live in the Amazon. And we can conduct research that's ethical and that gives back to the communities.
I'm just going to quote Joanna Macy's name because she talks about holding actions, so pushing back, creating a new world, and that we need a variety of approaches. I think in academia, money is a big part because every funding organization, especially public ones, they have their research agendas that don't necessarily align with what the world needs right now, and that has to change. So private funders are starting to get that, withdrawing down their foundations, money to spend it.
I only can tell you that I like to go to the source of things. I like my best food, the best source. I like the medicine from the best place, and I like the ceremonies, the most original from the right source. So that's where you can take your research. And the elders are the ones that can teach you too. And I was never good in academia, but that's the best I can teach you. Go to the source and support like now I have biologists helping us out and different, pues, how you say, academia people, so you can do it.
Que para los académicos que se funcionan en las universidades, ¿cómo se pueden apoyar y decolonizar?
O sea, ¿cómo se pueden apoyar para estar en la tradición y en la ciencia? Los que estudian, ¿no?
Digo, caminar con nosotros, hay que aprender.
Walk with us.
Walk with us together. Yeah.
So that's all we have for time, unfortunately. Please, we are all happy to take your questions.